there are 42 million people in this country that need food stamps on a weekly basis. And we're saying people deliberately instead of Americans, because most of the people that are on food stamps aren't even from this country. 45% of Afghanistan immigrants are on food stamps, 42% of Somali immigrants, 34% of every immigrant from Iraq, 23% of Haitians, 59% of all illegal aliens are collecting food stamps, meaning that most of the people getting food stamps from the U.S. government and the U.S. taxpayer are not even Americans. Think about that. And we didn't know about any of this before the government shutdown started, but thanks to Democrats, we can confirm tonight that millions of Joe Biden illegal aliens, people who crossed the border when Joe was president, are now collecting food stamps from a program funded by hardworking American taxpayers.
Now, that was Rob Finnerty from Newsmax. And when I sat and I listened to it, I was kind of taken aback. And today we're joined by Joe Wolverton II. He's a constitutional law scholar with the John Birch Society. And this is a great organization, folks. It's an organization that continues to champion the timeless truths of America's founding, that our rights come from God, not government. Joe has spent years educating citizens on the meaning of the Constitution as written, not as reinterpreted by modern courts and a lot of these leftist, progressive, elected politicians and bureaucrats. His writings and lectures challenge the growing power of Washington and call Americans back to a system where the people and the states hold the reins. As the shutdown drags on and food aid programs begins to run dry, Americans are asking deeper questions. What is the true role of government, and where do charity, faith, and local responsibility fit into a free society? Joe, welcome back to Detroit's Morning Answer.
Thank you. I love being with you. I appreciate the opportunity, sir, to talk to you.
Now, you heard Rob Finnerty. Joe, when you think about the number of illegal immigrants that have come into this our country over the last 4 years, I'll say. Mm-hmm. What does the Constitution say about these illegals receiving these benefits that take away from American citizens? I mean, is this a constitutional crisis issue, or is this just something that, nothing to see here, look away?
No, it is definitely a crisis, and the crux of the crisis is the Constitution represents a contract wherein all the powers of the federal government are laid out by the federal government's employer and the federal government's employee. You have a job contract where it tells you where you're going to go to work, what time you're going to work, what you're going to talk about, all of that. Well, the Constitution is that for the federal government. And you'll notice there is not a syllable in that document granting to the federal government the power to take income from one group of Americans and give it to any other group, whether they be Americans or not. Mm. That Constitution is being fundamentally violated every day in that way. And we could go a long way toward restoring prosperity to everyone, because I'll tell you, freedom is the tide that lifts all boats.
Yes, yes.
Nobody is left behind when we're all free. And now, we're not all going to be equally free, because you can't be equal and free at the same time.
Yeah. Because
just like anybody, you're going to work harder than the guy next to you, even if you have the same job. Right, constitutionally, none of this should be happening. But I'll tell you, it's even deeper than that, man. What we need to do is we need to look and say, why are we allowing this to happen? What is it about us that permits us to be governed over in this way by tyrannical forces that are determined to drown our society? Who are we that we're letting ourselves be abused this way?
I think about the General Welfare Clause. Joe,
Mm-hmm.
from a constitutional standpoint, is there any clause that supports the idea of federal food aid, or is every justification for it built on modern reinterpretations of the General Welfare Clause.
It's even beyond that. Every interpretation of it is built on the 14th Amendment. It's worse than the General Welfare Clause. It's General Welfare Clause stacked on top of the 14th Amendment, which equal protection is what they call it.
Mm-hmm.
So if one person gets something, then everybody's got to get it equally, which makes no sense at all. But there is not any. In fact, if you go, I would encourage your listeners, there's a famous speech by James Madison called the Cod Fisheries Bill. And if you read James Madison's statement when they passed the Cod Fisheries Bill, James Madison explains what general welfare was meant to do. General welfare means helps everybody in general, no one specifically, right? Well, these programs, I'm not getting helped by it. As a matter of fact, I'm getting impoverished. I'm being impoverished so that some unnamed Somali can feed his family. Now, I'm not begrudging him. Do you understand?
I do.
I'm not begrudging the man. I'm begrudging the system that makes it where that man can steal from me legally. That's what bugs me.
But Joe, but wasn't the Constitution written for Americans, for naturalized citizens? So why should they? You know, and I'm gonna pivot later. But I mean, this is why this whole they deserve due process. I get it. You can get a court date, and that's it, and let's go. Why are they afforded all due process? They're able to get our medical care. Why? Why should the American people? Because it's truly being abused, Joe. Why should we continue to fund this?
That's the perfect question. Why do we do it? Why do we allow 5 black-robed judges to determine what the Constitution means when that power is never granted to them in the Constitution? But the moment that the moment the Supreme Court says, well, the equal protection applies to, these refugees, then we give them the money. And we act as if that is constitutional when, in fact, it isn't constitutional. But what do we do about it by that point? And the answer that the John Birch Society has, the answer that I have is we can stop all this nonsense if we restore sovereignty and the balance of power to the state governments and have the states refuse to enact, refuse to cooperate with any unconstitutional act of the federal government. That includes the unconstitutional act of doling out billions in food stamps and other such benefits.
Yeah. I want to pivot to the birthright citizenship because I think that's going to be a key cog in the midterm elections because it's before the Supreme Court right now. I don't know if they're going to. Right. I don't know if they're going to argue it in this sitting or not. But you've long argued that the modern understanding of birthright citizenship is historically inaccurate. Can you walk us through the 14th Amendment? Because I know Jacob Howard from Michigan was one of the people who stood up on the floor to debate this, and he had a lot to say about that. This wasn't for, if you're not an American citizen, this wasn't for you. Walk us through the 14th Amendment's original intent and how these courts began distorting subject to the jurisdiction thereof.
Well, the 13th and 14th Amendments, these are very curious amendments. You've got, for example, the 13th, which outlaws slavery unless you're convicted of a felony. Well, that seems like a pretty open loophole. If you want to enslave someone, you find them guilty of a felony. And then along comes the 14th, and the 14th Amendment essentially, according to many people, was designed to repair the citizenship status of former slaves. But that's not what happened, right? Because what you had happen is the former slaves were left without education, were left without opportunity, and the people who could manipulate the system saw that this was a way to increase the number of people who you could manipulate into voting for you.
Yeah.
And so the 14th Amendment became a thing where all of a sudden it meant if you're born in America, you're American. Well, that never was the understanding of the Founding Fathers. That wasn't even understanding of Senator Howard. He did not believe that. In fact, like you said, he stood up and said, no. This doesn't mean the simple act of being born in America, because you might be born in America to two people who aren't at all, have no allegiance to America.
Right.
And so the traditional definition, the founding fathers took it, man, it's as if they copied and pasted it from a Swiss guy named Emer Bottle. And in his book that they all read and all quoted all the time, he said a citizen is someone who's born in a country of parents without a foreign allegiance. In other words, for you to be a natural born citizen, for you to have birthright citizenship, you have to not only be born here, but your parents have to be American citizens at the time of your birth. Simple as that.
Sounds clear to me.
And if you read the Constitutional Convention record, they make it very clear, and they say the reason we're doing this is so that in the highest echelons of our government councils, we will never have anyone with divided loyalty.
Wow.
Do we have that now? Do we have divided loyalty now?
Yeah. Yes. Exactly. You know,
I mean,
I want to go more into this. The John Birch Society. You guys have always maintained that America's crisis is primarily educational, and that we no longer understand the system we inherited. When I look at President Trump and how he's kicking over a lot of the sacred cows of the left, and what they've and how they've redefined and transformed, as fundamentally transformed, as Barack Obama said, this America, this great country that we live in. I really do believe that because of these people, these young people, and the way the educational system has taught them, they don't understand the original intent of the Constitution and why and how it was written, why it was written. I can hear people saying, "Well, what about slavery? The Constitution? I mean, we were slaves." But how does the current confusion, when you look at food aid, citizenship, how does the current confusion over food and aid, citizenship, and shutdowns reveal a broader civic illiteracy?
Well, I mean, we don't even understand basic terms. We don't know what a constitution is. We don't know what the word federal means. We don't know what the word sovereign means. We look, it's as simple as this. I teach people this whole 13-part class on the Constitution, and I'll start with one word, and that word is Congress. If we understood the word Congress, we'd understand more about the Constitution than you would getting a PhD in American history.
Wow. Because
the Founding Fathers chose that word to represent a certain system, but we aren't taught that. And I will tell you that one of my, like you say, the John Birch Society, and as a result, my chief aims in life is to enlighten people, because I believe when you enlighten them, you elevate them. If you treat them, they are men, they will act like men. And I believe that we have that opportunity to take these young people, and I teach a class every Friday afternoon for an hour, teaching these young people to understand the language of the Constitution and the Declaration. And you wouldn't believe the mind-blowing experiences we share together, because these kids have never been taught these basic things that our founding fathers knew from the cradle. And we've got these kids that they are gobbling it up because they feel the spirit and the power of understanding what these things meant when they were written. And they understand how, if we can get back to interpreting them the correct way, all of the ills that you just described in our body, politics that we have, most of those ills are cured by a restoration of education.
Well, Joe, I wish I can spend more time, but I got one final question for you.
Yes, sir.
You know, there's this growing argument that the Constitution itself is outdated, that it was written for a smaller, simpler nation. What would you say to young voters who believe the founding framework cannot sustain a modern superpower?
Well, the way I equate it is the Ten Commandments. Are the Ten Commandments outdated? You know, they were They were handed down 4,000 years ago, but I don't think any of us are going to say they're outdated. What we need to do is we need to take them as guiding principles and build our life upon it. And just in the United States, we take the Constitution as guiding principles and build our political life upon it. And you will see as we do so that the principles are not only timely, meaning we need them right now, but they are timeless, and we can apply them to our own time and bring such a brighter day to ourselves if we try.
And Joe Wolverton, I really do believe that the reason why people think we are in some that President Trump is a king is because they truly don't. They've been indoctrinated through the system of education. That's why I'm such a huge proponent of demolishing the Department of Education, returning education back to the states, Joe. That's a great idea, right?
We call it Make America States Again.
I love it. Joe Wolverton, guys, go out and get his book, The Real James Madison, The Founder's Guide to Constitutional Government and What Degree of Madness Federal Education's Policy War on the... I got that book. I actually do have that book. What Degrees of Madness Federal Education's Policy War on the American Mind. Anything that talks about something like that, I'm always buying it. Joe Wolverton II, thanks so much for joining us today.
Yes, sir. Thank you for the opportunity.
I appreciate it. Detroit's Morning Answer. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Detroit's Morning Answer. Here's a brief snippet of that Bannon interview.
Well, he's going to get a third term. So Trump 28. Trump is going to be president 28, and people just ought to get accommodated with that.
So what about the 22nd Amendment?
There's many different alternatives. At the appropriate time, we'll lay out what the plan is. But
now, Trump was trolling. I don't know about Steve Bannon. Steve Bannon, he's a diehard believer in these type of things.
He's serious.
I think he is serious. And that's why the media has posed that question to President Trump. Detroit's Morning Answer. We'll be right back.